Hello, this is Miss Andrea. I'll start like I always start by saying I don't do live streams for the audience. I do live streams to get the content out there and so that I don't really have to edit when I'm done. Today we're going to talk about homeschooling, public schooling, COVID schooling, what all that means, and how all of that is going for you. I'm going to request that anyone who comes on ask me a question. It can be about homeschooling, homeschooling, um, or COVID schooling, and I'll be glad to answer them. I am a homeschool advocate. I am a homeschool expert. I accept that title. Um, I also am very good at getting children into college with scholarships, whether they are homeschooled or whether they've gone to public school. So I'm also a college counselor by trade. I homeschooled my own children for 10 years, and after that, I started helping other people get into college who have homeschooled, and lately, people who haven't homeschooled have been coming to me in droves, and I'm realizing that the knowledge I have isn't just for homeschoolers, it is for everyone. And so I'm expanding what I do, and I just want to start a conversation and get the word out there. So I don't have any questions yet. So what I'm going to do is talk about something that just came across my news. And it is that homeschooling this year has doubled. The number of people homeschooling have doubled. And I don't think that includes the number of people who are forced to do school at home because of COVID-19. I think that's just people who were in traditional school before and decided to go all the way over to homeschooling, to choosing their own curriculum, to not dealing with the public school system at all. And so I'm going to read a little. Latest numbers from the US Census Bureau are showing an explosion of homeschooling across the country. Homeschooling has doubled since last spring when the pandemic hit. That pendulum is swinging. People want to take ownership of education at home, remarked Elijah Moses, a homeschool parent. I think a lot of parents from the African American community, didn't realize, are taking more ownership of how they educate their child, Moses explained. This person is in Buffalo, New York. New York is a really hard state to homeschool in. So if the numbers are doubling in New York, I'm super impressed. This person has a 20-year-old who is done homeschooling and a 15-year-old who they currently homeschool. Let's see what else. So basically, I think the first thing we need to do is to define homeschooling, because when this school year started and it became clear that a lot of people weren't going to be doing traditional school the traditional way, all these articles popped up online written by teachers, public school parents, just any bloggers who had kids, and they were how to homeschool. I read them and I was like, this is not how it works. This is not how any of it works. Because what they were talking about was homeschooling imposed by the public school onto parents of children who are public schooled. When the public school says homeschooling, or when people have said homeschooling in this year, it has meant they still have their teacher, they still have their school, they're just doing the work at home. And that is not homeschooling. I call it COVID schooling. And a lot of other traditional homeschoolers call it COVID schooling. And the reason for that distinction is because people hate it. Generally, people hate this type of homeschooling that they never intended to do. And so that's part of the problem. It's being forced upon them. Homeschooling is not something that is forced upon you. Homeschooling is something that you decide to do for whatever reasons. It could be religious, it could be special needs, it could be you just want something different, a different route of education for your child. Your child just might want to specialize in something. That's what homeschooling is. You go into homeschooling willingly. You are not told to homeschool. So the homeschooling that you are seeing right now, run by the public schools, is not that. Now, that said, the questions that I'm seeing right now in the Facebook groups are people coming on and saying, we've been homeschooling for 6 months through the school, COVID schooling, and we want to homeschool full time. What do we do? They want to come out of the public school sanctioned schooling and go into actual homeschooling. And the answers that they're getting are bothersome to me because they're being told, take a month off, decompress. Um, don't worry about it. Go fill out the forms, take a month off, relax for a while, take a little vacation, and then slowly start into homeschooling. And generally, that's good advice for someone wanting to start homeschooling. But right here and right now, my fear is that these parents are homeschooling because they feel pressed into it as a reaction from public school not working. And so if they follow that advice and just chill out for a whole month, they're going to end up way behind. And when everything is back to normal next year and they want to go back into the schools, there's going to be a problem. Their kids could very well get left back. So if this is you, if you've been schooling, under the public school system, but at home this year, and you're just sick and tired of it, and the kids are behind, nothing's getting done, there's tears, everyone's angry, and you decide to just homeschool for the rest of the school year, you can't just take that time off because chances are you might want to put the kids back next year. If you know that there's no way at all that you plan on putting the kids back, then you consider stepping back and taking a break so that the kids can have a clear definition between when this public school at home ended and when traditional school started. But I don't think it's good advice for traditionally homeschooled people like me to tell parents who are taking their kids out of the public school system to homeschool them because they're stressed from this whole COVID nonsense to take time off. I think it's unfair, and I think it sets them up to be stuck homeschooling, whether the rest of this year works for them or not. Once again, if you have any questions, homeschooling, public schooling, COVID schooling, college entry, please ask and I'll be glad to answer it. So now that we've defined the difference between homeschooling, something you go into willingly and something you control 100%, and COVID schooling, something that the public school has imposed upon you, we can move forward. And of course, there's in betweens. There are the virtual schools that public schools have set up, and a lot of kids were already doing that. And some kids have slid into that. But that is time consuming, like super bad. For every hour that your student would normally spend in front of a teacher, when you go into virtual schooling, the virtual school programs run by the government, they demand that your child spend 2 hours. So it takes twice as long to do virtual school as it does to do public school. So if you look at an article on Forbes, which I am looking at an article on Forbes, And Forge isn't going to let me look at it very clearly. I'm just going to read a little. If you only looked at social media, you would think it was a complete disaster. Numerous posts on Twitter and Facebook decrying how unprepared and overwhelmed parents were went viral, as did calls to pay teachers $1 million salaries after parents had to try teaching their kids on their own. Homeschooling, it seemed, was a bridge too far. But were those posts representative of broader sentiment? The people at EdChoice did a poll to find out. And the results are this. Number one, parents are more favorable to homeschooling as a result of the pandemic. They were home with their kids. They were stuck there. They were trying to do the school at home as run by the teacher, and they were seeing a lot of frustration. And they pulled back and started trying to teach the kids on their own. And they were like, okay, this isn't that bad. And number two, parents are open to hybrid homeschooling. This is super important. This is the kind of program that I run. Hybrid homeschooling is when someone who is a homeschooler chooses to take academic classes to help balance their homeschooling. My program specifically is geared around history and language arts. Other programs have math, the arts. My own children went to hybrid homeschool program that was 100% arts, choir, acting, visual art, the whole thing. And so that's a hybrid homeschool program. Basically, if you, the parent, can't teach a subject or feel like you can't do justice to that subject, then there are hybrid homeschool programs out there that you can enroll your students into different classes. And now you don't have a deficit in an area where you're not strong. So, to comply with social distancing guidelines, schools across the country have instituted hybrid schedules where students attend in-person class part-time and work from home the rest of the time. Interestingly, they destroy our definition of hybrid homeschooling, just as they've destroyed our definition of homeschooling. Hybrid homeschooling in the homeschool sense is a homeschooler who's homeschooling on their own accord, deciding to go out and take classes. What they're calling hybrid homeschooling are public schools putting children in a part-time program. It's not the same thing at all. So starting in January 2021, we have asked parents if they are open to considering a part-time schooling model in the future after the pandemic subsides. Candidly, given polling from other sources that say that parents have not been happy with hybrid learning, I expected the percentage of families who want to continue to be low. I was wrong. 44% of school parents said that after the pandemic, they would prefer a mix of in-person and at-home schooling, with 2 to 3 days at home being the most popular response, which is what most regular homeschoolers do. We tend to teach our kids at home 3 days a week and have a day or two where they go in and take classes at a church or co-op or whatever with their friends. People don't realize that about homeschooling. Homeschooling is a lot more active than people think. Result 3 of the poll. Homeschooling parents have been satisfied with their children's learning during the pandemic. They have? That is not what I have heard. Okay, let's read more. For the past year, we have asked parents how they feel their children are progressing on academic learning, emotional development, and social development. Homeschooling parents consistently report higher levels of satisfaction than average. When we look at the percentage of parents who say that their children are progressing very well, 33% of homeschooling parents say their children are doing so in academic learning, compared to 28% of all school parents. So here's the thing. I know a lot of kids, clearly. The more social children, the very outgoing, the super outgoing children aren't doing that well because they feel isolated. The quieter, introverted children have raised their game. I've seen children who were getting A's fall back to C's or worse, and I've seen quiet, introverted children who were getting C's are now getting A's. And that's just something we also have to consider when we're talking about homeschooling, public schooling, private schooling. It's not about which is better. It's about which is better for the child. So, questions, comments, concerns? An article out of California says homeschooling continues to increase in California amid the pandemic. Well, yeah, California is a really bad hotspot right now, so they've shut a whole lot of things down. Our website hits have the Homeschool Association of California says our website hits have doubled to tripled to the presence of and questions on our social media have doubled and tripled versus last year. And so people are basically calling them and asking them how they start homeschooling. In California, there's several options, and one way is to start your own private school. It requires an affidavit to the state that says, I am now a private school. And so a lot of parents have decided to go that route. Once again, as I said at the beginning of the live stream, don't switch to homeschooling and then take a vacation. You know, as many traditional homeschoolers are advising. They're like, oh yeah, decompress, don't do anything for a while. Ease your way into it. Guys, it's March, it's almost April. You can't do that. You have to see where your kids are in class and go ahead and finish the year and then take the summer off. You know, I think I think traditional homeschoolers are setting traditional public school families up to fail because they're giving them typical homeschool advice that says, take your time, no rush, take time off, don't worry about it. And they're assuming these people are going to homeschool for life. I've already seen half of everyone I know who decided to start homeschooling because of COVID. They're all re-enrolling for next year. And so what these message boards are saying is, oh my gosh, we're homeschooling this year and I want to re-enroll my kid for next year. And they're saying that we're going to be left back a year if I don't have an accredited transcript or if I don't have a standardized test that says that my child has excelled. This is why, as much as I wish the whole world were full of rainbows and homeschoolers, that I don't give public school families the same advice that I give, lifers, homeschool lifers. A day ago, there was an article about Drew Barrymore, and she says homeschooling during the pandemic was a complete hot mess. This is what I'm hearing from people. Now, school is in charge of the schooling. It is COVID schooling, it is not homeschooling. So, Drew Barrymore has been a hot spot for people. But as fun as the talk show has been to film, and as necessary as the conversation she has on it are for people stuck at home, the actress and mother of two admits that she's struggling just the same as other parents during the pandemic. I have so much empathy for parents right now because my kids have been in homeschool for a year and not seeing their friends, she tells Yahoo Live. I was doing homeschooling with them, trying to upstart the show in the afternoon, and it was a complete hot mess. Drew Barrymore's a little bit of a hot mess, but the funnest hot mess that you can have. The 46-year-old mother to Olive, 8, and Frankie, 6, whom she shares with ex-husband, blah, 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 explains that their life at home used to have structure, starting with putting the girls on the uniforms and getting ready for school. As that daily routine shifted with the pandemic, however, she's had to implement new habits to maintain some semblance of regimen, like starting the day off with breakfast together. And we talk about her Kellogg's, work with Kellogg's. We don't care. Nice way to slide that in there, though. So, what have we talked about so far? We've defined the difference between homeschooling and COVID schooling, right? And then we've gone as far as to define the difference between homeschool hybrid and public school hybrid. None of these things are the same, and I really hate that they didn't find some new words because it's causing confusion for everyone. So, how has the way that I deal with homeschooling changed in this last year? Well, fall of last year, before COVID, I started a homeschool program in person at a church, and it was fun. Had a dozen kids. We studied history together. A year ago, March, we had to transition over to Zoom school. It has not been as much fun. The kids hang in there because they enjoyed the program before, and so they continue to enjoy the program as much as possible. But we went from one class to 3 classes also. And so we have kids who aren't used to us now doing Zoom classes with us. Zoom classes with kids is hard. If one child turns off their camera, everybody turns off their camera. I feel for these public school teachers. And then you have to say, everyone's camera on, and you get the little text message that says, I'm eating. Why are you eating now? If you were in class, you would not be eating, right? Of course, my husband's gonna text me nonstop. So they're doing that. They're eating, they're yawning. And they don't yawn like this, they yawn like this. And like I've told kids, I'm like, your tonsils look good. Can you please cover your face? They started off doing all their schoolwork and getting it done well, but something happened around Christmas time and everyone just started dialing it in. They just started dialing it in and not getting the work done. And so I'm speaking to my friends with kids in the traditional school world, and I'm speaking to my teacher friends, and I'm hearing the same thing. Kids are not doing okay right now with homeschooling or with public school at home. They are dialing it in. They are doing as little work as humanly possible. They don't care anymore. They want things to go back to normal. Because what you have to understand is that normal for homeschoolers is not doing school at home. No, no, no. We've already talked about the hybrid homeschool thing. We get out 2 days a week, meet with friends, do group classes, and that sort of thing. So these kids, and then I mean, there are some homeschool families who are never home. Tuesday and Thursday, they're at one hybrid program. Monday and Wednesday, they're at a co-op. Friday, they're doing field trips. And so everyone has been grounded, not just public school kids. Everyone has been grounded together, and nobody is happy at all. At all. And so, because I have a homeschool program, a lot of people have said, has your school exploded? Did you get lots of numbers this year? Are you making a lot of money? No, because I did not allow a massive influx into my homeschool program, because I know that if I did hire 10 teachers to handle an influx of 100 families, In the spring, I would be letting go of those 10 teachers, or at least 7 of them. Because if you're people who are homeschooling because they're forced to, chances of them continuing to homeschool is low. Here's an article from North State Journal, Raleigh, North Carolina. As schools reopen, will North Carolina's homeschool boom continue? There is no doubt that school shutdowns resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic have caused a spike in interest in homeschooling, and North Carolina has seen explosive growth in its own homeschool population in that time. But many are wondering how many of the families that have chosen homeschooling during the 2021 school year will continue down that path once school has reopened. Probably 30%. Spencer Mason, Law and Policy Director for North Carolinians, I said it, for home education, told North State Journal that as of July 2020, there were 97,000 homeschools in the state, and by the end of the year, there were up to 20,000 more, and that's just last spring. In the country at large, National Home Education Research Institute says there are 4 to 5 million homeschool students, which is about 8% of all school-age children altogether. And in the spring of 2019, there were only 2.5 million. So the number of homeschoolers have certainly doubled in the last year. And when we go back to definition, I mean the number of homeschooling families who have chosen to homeschool and are no longer under the teacher, or no longer under the school. They are in charge and they are doing it. And here's what they're saying about many new homeschoolers. They think that many new homeschoolers are planning on staying. I don't. What do you think? Leave a comment. I think we've had a lot that initially thought they were going to do it for a year, or in some cases, just to finish out the 2020-21 school year, he said. But now we're getting a lot of folks that are saying, this is a lot better than we thought it would be. Our kids are doing really well. They're enjoying it. They like learning. And a lot of them are talking about how their kids never liked school anyway and are enjoying learning at home. So that's another little thing we've been noticing, is we've had a lot of folks who are planning on just doing it for a year or for a period of time, and now they're changing their tune. I'm not seeing that locally in Atlanta, where I'm at all. Although, we'll see. I'm getting some traffic. I'll update that if it changes. But as of right now, I'm seeing that the number of homeschoolers locally around me have doubled. And then, and now I'm seeing that they're starting to tick back down. And I'm seeing messages from parents saying, I'm trying to re-enroll my kid for next year and the school's pushing me back because we homeschooled. What do we do? Normally, if this happens, and it happens a lot, someone will decide to homeschool, and by February, they're tapped out. They couldn't do it. And they put the kids back in school, and there's typically no problem. But people unenrolled en masse. They unenrolled en masse. So they went from 20 parents in a school in a year saying, we're going to homeschool, and then the next year coming back and saying, never mind. And now they've gone from 200. The school can't just be like, okay, let's go, come back in. We'll just see where we are and we'll deal. No, the school needs paperwork. So if you're planning on re-enrolling your children next year after you've started out COVID schooling and then slipped over to homeschooling, and you want to re-enroll your kids next year, you might have some work to do. And you're definitely going to want to do some, hey, T. Clark, you're definitely going to want to do some standardized testing to prove that your child is capable of being promoted to the next grade up. Because where in past years, the schools would let you back in if you started homeschooling and changed your mind. They aren't doing that anymore. They're giving you a hard time. T. Clark says, I plan on keeping my children at home for as long as I can. And the few families that I've let into my homeschool program this year, the new homeschoolers who were fleeing the schools, I only let them in if they told me that they're long haul homeschoolers, because I don't want to do anyone a disservice. If you're going to go back to school next year, you need to follow the school's plan, not mine. You know what I mean? Um, yeah. And so if you've been in a traditional school and now you've decided that you want to homeschool now, and you've started homeschooling, and now you're like, we're homeschooling all the way through. So now what do you do? What do you do? A lot of people, year one, use an online curriculum. Time for Learning is very popular in the younger grades. It's very easy to use. There are several book packages, there's video packages, there's online packages that people use. But as they get comfortable with the idea of homeschooling, with the idea of teaching their kids themselves, they start saying, okay, I'm going to use this subject from this program, and this subject from that program, and this subject from that program. Or you know what? There's no such thing. My kid wants to study this thing, and there's no such thing as a course for it. So we're just gonna write a plan, follow it, do the things, and write a term paper. Um, if anyone has any specific questions about any kind of curriculum things and needs some feedback, I not to be boastful, but I am absolutely the person to ask. This is what I'm very good at. So let's see. Oh, so this freaks me out, and this is from last summer, but because when people step out of traditional schooling, that's paid for by the government, and step into homeschooling that they pay for themselves, the schools lose money. And so, in anticipation of COVID schooling being about to happen for certain, a lot of people started writing articles saying that homeschooling was dangerous. Um, I think someone at Harvard wrote a ton of articles about the lack of socialization and programming children, um, and isolating children from children who weren't like them, and that thing. So in North Carolina, the articles that came out last summer said that North Carolina laws related to homeschooling are lax. As long as the parent says she is homeschooling her child, by registering the homeschool with the state, she can teach the world to her child or teach nothing at all. No government agency has the right to judge the quality or even the existence of the education. Were a neighbor or relative to notice the homeschooled child's education was being neglected, they would have nowhere to turn. Neither the local school board of education, the local Department of Social Services, nor the State Division of Non-Public Education, which registers homeschools, has any authority to invest such a complaint. That's not true. That's not true. What is true is when a parent decides to homeschool, you go to your state and you look at the laws. In North Carolina, the laws, I'm pretty sure, are you fill out the paperwork and say, hey, we're going to homeschool. And then the school says, okay, you need to teach 180 days a year. You need to average 5 hours a day. You need to teach math, language arts, history, science, and some phys ed. Like, they give them a loose guideline. Now, from what book they're teaching them, can they add extra stuff? Absolutely. That's the thing. But if a grandparent or a neighbor or a sibling or anyone decides that that parent's neglecting their child, they can absolutely go to DFACS and make a claim of educational neglect. So the fact that someone wrote something alarmist is unfortunate. I'm not 100% surprised by it because the schools are losing money. And so they want to keep up the alarm of people being cautious and side-eyeing homeschooling, because public school as we know it will fall apart if everyone homeschools. Even if everyone just homeschooled this year, things would fall apart. Like the schools could likely deal with some serious bankruptcy issues. So I'm Black. This is about Black parents. Let's read it. Pandemic learning may have made some Black parents homeschool converts. Pre-pandemic, Black homeschoolers accounted for 8% of those learning at home. Yeah, that's about right. When I was homeschooling, I'd swear I was in the 2%, but it's been a while. Engaged Detroit is a pilot program dedicated to supporting Black families who are ready to jump into homeschooling. Stacy Young is a mom of 5, 3 boys, 2 girls. Trying to manage virtual learning when COVID precautions closed the schools drove her to actual tears. Yeah, she was stressed, her kids were stressed. So she decided to pull back, to stop demanding her kids spend hours in front of the computer, to focus on their emotional needs. Then the school called. Young says she asked them if they had services for parents who are working or for kids dealing with the stress of COVID restrictions or who have lost loved ones to the virus. And the lady took a deep breath and she was like, Ms. Young, is he going to be able to log in tomorrow? Young withdrew her kids as soon as she hung up. I had to get mad enough to make the transition to homeschool, she says. My entry into homeschooling was similar. I had to get mad. Another Black family says our kids were being, suspended, expelled, bad behavior, these things. And then you start to ask yourself, who can learn in that environment? And that's why a lot of Black families are homeschooling. And, just that thing of being stuck at home this past year with COVID, parents are looking at their kids a little differently and going, what if I did sit down with them and explain everything to them, patiently as a parent would? What if they could move faster when they knew something and didn't have to sit and wait for the rest of the class? So, yeah. Michigan, Detroit, homeschooling has expanded and it's a Black city. So, Black homeschoolers have expanded, which is great because it's been hard homeschooling as one of few. And I've made it a point for the homeschool program that I run here in Atlanta. My partner in this business is a white woman, and we try to make sure that we're recruiting families that are Black and white. We'd love a 50-50. It is whatever the community is, but we're doing a good job. And we actually have 2 families of mixed kids. I guess they feel most comfortable because, we're so evenly dispersed. So I've done many articles on this, things to consider when deciding if you want to homeschool your child. And if you go through my videos, you will find them. First of all, as we defined in the beginning, you have to know what homeschooling is. Homeschooling is your decision to teach your child at home. COVID schooling, or whatever you want to call it, is the school's decision that your kids are going to be taught at home. There are several options for homeschooling beyond a parent teaching his or her child. It doesn't mean you and your child at a table struggling over a subject that the parent may or may not even be strong in. Other options include live lessons with teachers, When we started homeschooling, my husband was like, yeah, now hire a teacher and get 3 other homeschool families in and we can share a teacher. And I'm like, honey, we don't have it like that. We can't pay for that. But when there was a subject that I wasn't strong in, yeah, I hired a tutor or I brought the kids to a co-op or a group class because I wasn't going to handicap my children in my ineptitude, you know. So there's that. There's umbrella schools where someone outside of your home supervises what you're doing. They look at your program. They tell you, hey, do more of this, do less of this, whatever. I hope to, in the next year or two, become an umbrella school, although they're not required in my state. A lot of parents need that comfort, but I need to get my accreditation paperwork before I can do that. And before I can get my accreditation paperwork, I have to have a brick and mortar location. And I was about to get one last March and COVID happened. So I'm pretty sure we're going to be in a church again next year. And I can't get my accreditation in someone else's location. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. You will be in charge of your child's education if you homeschool. It will be up to you to make sure your child is engaged and is learning. You will have to keep up with paperwork. You will have to keep up with grades. More so in high school than anything, if you take a more laid back approach, but it's still important. You will have to be able to help your child learn, though there are many resources that can help you do that. Newsflash for public school families. You also need to be in charge of your child's education. Yes, they have teachers. Yes, they have a principal. Yes, they have the school, the whole system, the state. But if your child starts failing, you're just going to get a note, you know, and chances are they're going to try to intervene to some degree, but they're going to let your child keep failing. When my kids were in public school, if they started struggling in a subject, I doubled down on the homework with that subject at home, or I hired a tutor to help them with that subject at home. At the end of the day, the school is a public service. The teacher is provided as a public service to you. But you know what? There was a lawsuit at this point, I want to say 2 years ago, in Detroit, Michigan, where parents were realizing that fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth graders were illiterate. They sued the school system, and the verdict that was handed down was that schools were not obligated to make sure the children weren't illiterate. There were kids who were well past, should be able to read age, who were illiterate. And the court said, not our fault, not our problem. So it doesn't matter if you're in public school, private school, homeschooled, parents, you're in charge because your kid, nobody knows them like you do. If there's a subject that your kid's struggling in, there are tutors, and you don't have to pay for tutors all the time. Call your church, call your local church. You don't go to church, call a church in your neighborhood, call a community center in your neighborhood. There are people who will volunteer their time to tutor your children if you can't pay for it. If you can pay for it, give them a little something, something, because it's hard work. It really is. So you also have to understand that some school districts do not allow homeschool children to participate in sports. That's something I'm seeing in the homeschool Facebook groups right now. I want to homeschool next year. Where do I enroll my child for basketball? Or which schools allow us to enroll? Some private schools will let your children join their teams. But first, they're going to populate the team from their own tuition paying students. And then if there are spots left over, then they'll do a little trial and add a couple more kids. They're not going to just be like, well, come one, come all, everyone gets a fair chance at the team. That's not how that works. Where I live, there's some parks and recreation type things, and there's a lot of AAU, so you can do sports in the summer. But we've opted to not do public schooling, so we have to understand that public school doesn't owe us a place on the team. However, there are many opportunities for athletics, dojos, taekwondo, karate, judo, martial arts, extremely popular in homeschool communities because they're kind of solo sports. You don't have to be in a team. You just go to the dojo, you practice. My children did fencing. Fencing is more of an individualized sport. Tennis is very popular. There are a lot of sports that you can do that aren't team sports. There are team sports, they're just harder to find, and you really have to look. I need to close this page because it is trying to shut down my computer and I don't want to lose my live stream. So I'd love to answer any questions that anyone has about homeschooling. I'd love to answer any questions anyone has about public schooling. Where I am right now is kind of where homeschooling and public schooling converge. I find myself spending as much time talking to public school parents as I do with homeschooling parents and giving the same advice. And basically is mom and dad, you are in charge. You have to be in charge. If you don't like what's going on in school, you have to make it known. If you're homeschooling, it's all on you. And that's scary. I remember when I started homeschooling, I remember having this conversation with my husband, and it was something like, if the children fail, it's all on me. Whereas when they were in public school, if they had failed, I had someone to blame. And now I have no one to blame but myself. That makes you sit up real tall. That makes you pay a lot of attention. Um, and you should. And you absolutely should. Computer's doing a weird thing. Okay, there we are. So some advice that I gave, some of my best homeschooling advice. Let's do that. Let's do my best homeschooling advice for public school students. Number one, practice math daily. Sounds simple, right? It is and it isn't. Math builds on itself. You can't you can't learn multiplication kind of like 80% and then do well in division. You have to 100% understand multiplication to divide. You have to 100% understand converting decimals to percentages and back before you can move on into algebra. You have to 100% understand algebra to do well in algebra 2. Students who get B's in algebra and think they're okay, they'll get a B in algebra. They'll be like, "Woo, I got an 82. It's fine, it's fine. I'm going to rest this summer, and then next year we're going to do algebra 2." And they get in there and they fail algebra 2. Mistake number one, thinking that 80% was enough to build the next course on. Mistake number two, taking the summer off because brain drain. When you go back, you really only know 60% of algebra. So my best advice to all parents of all students is to do math for a half hour every day. Okay, you can have Sunday off. Okay, you can have Saturday off, but okay, Friday. But you have to do math 3, 4, 5 times a week every day or you won't excel in it. The kids who do well in math treat it like puzzles and they just do them all the time. You can't take a back seat to that. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is stop worrying so much about being well-rounded. No one is well-rounded. When you go into the workforce, every single person there doesn't have 18 interests and they don't have 18 strengths. Each person has one or two strengths and one or two interests. And that's what they focus on because that's what they are best at. Allow your child to have an area of specialty. Um, yeah, they've got a B in science, but they can write and debate like nobody else. If you force them to take time away from their writing and debate and their reading to get that A in that science class, it's gonna pull them their grade down in the areas where they're good. It's gonna pull down their focus. It's gonna pull down their love of it because they're gonna be too tired to do that thing that feeds them. Let your kids specialize, especially if you homeschool. Let your kids specialize. The pattern that I typically notice is that children are usually good in math and science or language, arts, and history. They're either mathematical scientific brain or they're verbal brain. So it's okay to be average in one or the other if you're off the charts, in your area of interest. And honestly, that's what colleges are looking for. Personal example is my daughter was completely average in math. I made her do math every day for 5 years, 30 minutes to 90 minutes, depending on what time of the school year it was. In the summer, it was 30. But she was just averaging it. And so on the SAT, she got a 490. Like that is the most average grade you can get on an SAT in something. Her verbal score, however, was 790. And it's really unusual to get that high in verbal. She went to college on full scholarship because they weren't looking for a perfect student. They were looking for a student who was going to make a mark in an area. That's what schools are looking for. Yeah, Ivy Leagues want that 4.0, but that's usually weighted because they're taking APs and things like that. And if you're taking that AP route, and this is more public school, don't make them take APs in their weaker subjects. Make them take the regular classes in their weaker subjects and have them take the APs in the subjects they're gifted in. That way, they'll be able to get A's across the board and still have a really good over 4.0 GPA. So I'm almost to the end of my time. My throat is actually running out of steam. Once again, I do these lives, and I'm going to start doing lives again, probably every other week on the weekends. I do these lives not to have an audience, though an audience helps. I do the lives to get this content and material out. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and publish this live as it is, so anyone who wants to watch it in full can watch it in full. But then I'm also gonna edit it down and pull out the important parts and put that into a shorter video that people can kind of enjoy on a more bite-sized level. Okay, I have 6 minutes left, so I'm gonna do some common homeschool questions that people ask. The first one is socialization. What are you going to do about socialization? Are your kids going to be socialized? I've done many videos on this. It seems I can't do enough videos on this. First of all, we have to define what we're talking about when we say socialization. You ever been in fifth grade? I'm sure everyone's been in fifth grade. And the teacher says, the kids are talking, and the teacher turns around and goes, "Hey, we're not here to socialize." That's what the public thinks of when they think about, school socialization. That's not even allowed. The definition of socialization is, how do I explain this? You have a bunch of kids in the school whose parents have this extreme philosophy. And you have a bunch of kids in school whose parents have this extreme philosophy. And then you have a bunch of kids, let's represent them with my head, who have, a more balanced philosophy. What socialization does is it brings all the kids to center, because these kids are hearing what those kids are saying, and these kids are saying, and these kids are, doing the same. That's socialization. There are good things about socialization, and there are bad things about socialization. Think Lord of the Flies, children raising children. And all the kids are coming together and being more like-minded, but they're children. And kids come up with some crazy stuff. So, first of all, homeschoolers do socialize. As I've said many times in this last hour, they get out, they have classes together, they have park days, they do their fencing, sports, taekwondo, they do all that. They're very much into drama. I don't know a homeschool child alive who's not in a drama club and who doesn't do 2 plays a year. Some just stay behind the tech deck and do the light and sound and set. But yeah, there's lots of socializing in that. Next question, and this is never really a question, but it's always a statement. And a parent will say, "Oh, you homeschool." I don't have the patience to do that. I never could do that. And my answer is, I didn't have the patience either. That's why it took me so long. My husband wanted me to homeschool from the second our son was born. Someone that with him at work caught his ear, and was talking to him about homeschooling. And he came home from work all bouncy and was like, "I spoke to someone today who homeschooled, and we should think about that." And I cussed him out. First of all, I was postpartum. So you really just don't want to just like bounce into the room with that on a postpartum woman who's like, and I think I yelled something like, "You're trying to keep me barefoot and pregnant," and things like that. But, when homeschooling became a necessity, when I saw for my kids that, okay, this is something we have to do because what's going on right now isn't working, I chilled out. I started reading and I started listening. And I started internalizing and thinking more about why was I getting angry, not why are they aggravating me? Because sometimes I was just like overreacting or I was just tired. And I instituted mom's timeout. And I had a big closet and I had a blanket in my closet. And I'd say, "Mommy needs a timeout." And I would go upstairs and roll out that blanket and lay face down on the floor. What my kids didn't know is something about that closet allowed me to hear everything that went on in the kitchen. So I could lay on the floor in the kitchen and listen to them talk about me, like, "What's her problem? I don't know why she got all twisted up," and that's really funny. Certification. No, parents don't need to be certified to teach their children. There are some states that require that a GED is had by the instructing parent. Just one of the parents need to at least have a GED diploma. But like I've said many times, if there's a subject you can't teach, you hire somebody, you find somebody to help you with that. And that's how you go about it. I hate it when people say, "Well, teachers need certifications. Why don't homeschool parents need certifications?" Teachers absolutely need certifications. They're teaching strangers. Parents are paying taxes to the government, and the government is paying these teachers who need to be certified for them to teach them. Parents gave birth to these kids, you know. They need to be mindful of what they're doing. But no, they don't need certification. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. Final question. How do you homeschool children in different grade levels? It's not easy. It's not easy. What you do is you divvy up the work, and some subjects can be done on your own, and some subjects can be done, need that connection, that person talking to you. And for little kids also, homeschooling goes very quickly. So you get the older kids started on the work that they can do on their own, the homework, and you have them do that while you work one-on-one with the younger children. And then when the younger children are done and it's their playtime, now you sit down with the big kid, and then you might sit down with them again after dinner, when the little kid's gone quiet. That's how that's done. If anyone has any questions about homeschool, public school, and college entry, any of those things, leave a message in the comments, and I will make sure that I have that list ready to address next time I do a live. Until next time.